Hi, thank you for tuning in today to watch Digging for Truth, where we present archaeological discoveries which enhance our understanding of the Bible. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Now, if you've watched Digging for Truth before, then my guest today will be a very familiar face. If it's your first time watching, then you're in for a real treat. Bryan Windle joins us from Canada to survey our top 10 archaeological discoveries from 2023. Bryan, welcome back to Digging for Truth, brother. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks so much for having me again, Henry. This is going to be fun.
All right, it is going to be fun. You got some great stuff ready for the audience today. We're doing our top 10 countdown. Now, for somebody watching the first time, you've got some criteria that you lay out for your top 10 lists. Go ahead and share that if you would.
Yeah, so there are a number of us who do top 10 lists, and sometimes our lists are different. That's part of the fun of top 10 lists, seeing how my list relates to, for example, Todd Boland's list from Bible Places or Gordon Govier's list from Christianity Today. And it might come down to different things we emphasize, but I think it also comes down to our criteria. And so the criteria that I use when I choose my list are such. First of all, they have to be discoveries that are related to peoples, places, or events in Scripture or to the composition of Scripture itself. Secondly, they must be discoveries or studies of discoveries as opposed to announcements. So every year I go through about 200 stories or so from the world of biblical archaeology, and I do a weekly update, breaking news update for ABR's website and on my own website, Bible Archaeology Report. Then I do at month end the top 3, and it's from these that I pick. And sometimes there are stories that are announcements. For example, in May 2023, they announced that they were going to build a new archaeological park at the site of Samaria. So that is the site of the ancient capital of the Northern Kingdom of Israel. That's a huge announcement, but it's not a discovery, so I'm not going to consider it for my list. And the final criteria is this: I only consider discoveries or studies that have been publicized either through a country's Ministry of Antiquities or through a licensed archaeological dig with the understanding that a peer-reviewed article is going to follow, or that actual peer-reviewed article itself, or an article from a reputable journal. So those are the things that I consider, and those are my criteria.
Well, that sounds good. All right, well, let's kick it off, Bryan. We got number 10 and number 9. Let's go.
All right, number 10 and number 9, we're going to start with some sensational finds. And so when both of these finds hit the news, it caused all sorts of stories all around the world. Number 10 is 4 Roman swords that were discovered in a Judean cave. This was announced in September 2023, that there were 4 1,900-year-old swords that had been discovered in a cave in the En-Gedi Nature Reserve. Now, archaeologists were there because they were studying an inscription that appears to be from the First Temple period that's on a stalactite. But while they were there, they discovered 4 swords that were hidden away in a crevice. And they were in amazing conditions. They're iron swords. They're still in their wooden and leather sheaths. 3 of them were the size of Roman spatha swords, so 24 to 26 inches in length. And the 4th sword was shorter. It's a ring pommel sword, about 18 inches long. And their theory is that these come from the Bar Kokhba revolt of AD 132 to 135. The rebels were there. They hid them in the cave and then never came back to get them. Now, here's what's interesting. That shorter sword would have been what the Roman soldiers carried. It would have been referred to as a pugio, a dagger. And some scholars believe that the sword that Peter used to cut off the ear of the servant of the high priest on the night that Jesus was arrested would have been very similar to this, and likely would have been called a pugio by the Roman soldiers at that time. So it kind of gives us an idea of what swords from the time of Jesus and swords that are mentioned in the Bible were like. So that was my choice for number 10. And the choice for number 9 was a gold bead that was discovered in Jerusalem. In February 2023, it was announced. There were volunteers that were working at a sifting project where they were wet sifting and dry sifting stuff, and a 1,600-year-old gold bead was discovered. It was round, and it was actually constructed by basically welding in some way, attaching 10 tiny balls of gold in a circle, each attached to each other, in order to create this bead. And this method is they believe a Mesopotamian type of construction for a gold bead. Now, gold is very rare. It's rarely discovered in archaeological digs because of its rarity to begin with. And so this was a sensational discovery. It was actually found along the pilgrimage road in their excavations. That's where the earth had come from that was being sifted. And it was found in an impressive Roman building that was 25 meters long or so. And they think it was probably something that belonged to a wealthy person in that period of time who lost it, and was discovered some 1600 years later in Jerusalem. And so that was my choice for number 9.
Yeah, that's great stuff, Brian. I'll tell you, that sword story was really fascinating. People are fascinated with ancient weapons, and movies and things like that. Thing I'm always intrigued by is what did the man do who had his ear cut off when Jesus restored it? What's the story that happened after that? It would be fun to use our sanctified imagination for that, but we can't do that because we need to move to number 8, Brian, so let's do it.
All right, number 8 relates to King David. And it is a study that was published by Joseph Garfinkel from Hebrew University. He published it in the academic journal, the Jerusalem Journal of Archaeology, and it was entitled Early City Planning in the Kingdom of Judah, and he looked at a number of sites in Judah. And what he discovered was that they all bore similarities in their city planning. And so he looked at sites, in addition to the sites that he excavated. He himself has excavated at Khirbet Qeiyafa and Lachish City 5. And he looked through all these old excavation reports from these other cities. And what he discovered was that all 5 of the cities that he studied had similar urban layouts that included walls that were attached to houses that were attached to the city wall on one side and had a road running on the other side. All were connected by important roads in the ancient world to each other. And many of these particular sites yielded inscriptions in their excavations, which indicates a certain written communication at that time. And of course, this runs counter to the narrative of Bible minimalists who would say that the extent of David's kingdom is not as great as the Bible exaggerates. And what this study shows is that there does seem to have been some centralized authority that was guiding the construction of urban centers within the kingdom, which would be an indication of a kingdom that was being governed by some central authority, much like the Bible describes with King David's kingdom.
Yeah, a great lesson of these urban development, if you want to call it that, or spread out, is again these are consistent with the claims of the biblical text. I mean, at Khirbet Qeiyafa alone, I think it's 150,000 tons of stone or some absurd number like that. I mean, that is no small feat, and that's just one of the cities that you mentioned. Well, Brian, we're going to get to number 7 after this break, and we'll be right back.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures for students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device or go to our website lighthousetv.org for more information.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. We're counting down the top 10 archaeological discoveries of 2023. Okay, Brian, into number 7, my friend.
All right, number 7 is about a biblical text that was found, and there are a number of these finds on the list this year. Number 7 was an ancient inscription from the book of Psalms that was discovered at a Judean desert fortress. Archaeologists from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem unearthed this inscription from the book of Psalms that dates to the Byzantine era, so several hundred years after Jesus, and it was located at Hyrcania, a Judean fortress. It's about 10 miles southeast of Jerusalem. Now, it was constructed in the Hasmonean era. And then Herod the Great enlarged it, but then it was abandoned after his death. And finally, in the Byzantine era, there was a small Christian monastery that came in there. And at the end of the 5th century AD, and this Byzantine inscription is quite something. It is a quote from the book of Psalms, from Psalm 86, verses 1 and 2. Now, this is what Psalm 86, 1 and 2 says. It says, hear me, Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Guard my life, for I am faithful to you. Save your servant who trusts in you. You are my God. That's the translation from the NIV. And what this particular piece of scripture did was it substituted Jesus's name in at the beginning of that quote. And so instead of hear me, Lord, guard my life, it says, Jesus Christ, guard my life, for I am poor and needy. Guard my life, for I am faithful to you. And so very interesting, this quote from the book of Psalms, but clearly has been used of Jesus and his name substituted into it. So that was my choice for number 7. And number 6 was a really interesting discovery from Jerusalem itself. It was the discovery of destruction levels from both the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 587 or 586, depending on which date you go with, and also from the destruction of the Romans in 70 AD. Now, these destruction layers have been found throughout the city before in different places, but this was the first time that both destruction layers were discovered in the same dig. And so that was discovered by a team at the Mount Zion Archaeological Excavation, led by Shimon Gibson and Rafi Lewis. And so they were able to find in this same area this destruction layer separated by a space in the stratigraphy. You have obviously the destruction layer from the Babylonians. You have that a little lower, and then on space of occupation, and then on top of that, the destruction layer from the Romans. And so that was really important. The first time both destruction layers found in the same area in the city of Jerusalem.
Yeah, nothing like a destruction in the archaeological record for the archaeologist to correlate with the text. And, that inscription is fascinating too. It reminds me of the mosaic in the Megiddo prison that was found a few years ago, where Jesus is referred to as God early in the history of the church. Fascinating stuff. But we can't delay here, Brian, because we got to get to number 5, my friend. You are rolling. Let's do it. Keep going.
All right, let's do number 5, and we'll do number 4 too. Number 5 is a new radiocarbon study that clarified the dating of the famous 6-chamber gate from Gezer. And so this was published in the journal PLOS ONE, and it analyzed 35 radiocarbon dates that spanned the time frame from the latter half of the late Bronze Age, so LB2B period, right up through to the Iron Age 2 period. And these were all taken from the excavations at Gezer that were led not that long ago, a number of years ago, by the Tandy Institute for Archaeology at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, before that program shut down. And what they discovered, one of the interesting finds, was from stratum 8. Now, stratum 8 is the stratum that has that famous 6-chambered gate. And what they discovered is that it dates to the 10th century, as do the walls and an administrative building that was there. And that's very important because the Bible indicates that Solomon was the one who built that. And so this dates it now to within the reign of Solomon. And I would also suggest that these findings contradict the stated views of Israel Finkelstein, who in the past has publicly stated Gezer was not built by Solomon, but built about a century later by the Omride dynasty, King Omri and his sons from the northern kingdom. And so this seems to indicate that yes, the Bible was correct all along, and attributing that to Solomon. And number 4 is a really important one. It was a new study of the famous Moabite stone, the Mesha inscription, which is a victory monument from King Mesha. And it describes his victories and seems to reference the Moabite rebellion that's named in Scripture in 2 Kings chapter 3. And the interesting thing about this is that it has the phrase House of David as well. Now, this was something Andre Lemaire suggested 30 years ago, but technology has caught up now, and they have been able to take photos from multiple angles and build a 3-dimensional image from all of those photos. They did another study where they took shone light through the squeeze that was done of the damaged parts, and this phrase goes through both. And what they discovered was that of the 5 letters, Hebrew letters that make up the phrase House of David, 4 of them are now firmly established and confirmed. The 5th is a little fuzzy, but you can imply it and logically infer what it is, and it says House of David. Moreover, there are clearly dots on either side in the inscription, which indicates it's a single phrase. So I think it's pretty safe to say now that this is another inscription that says House of David confirmed.
Yeah, it's the great thing about new technology. We can go back and look at old discoveries. Now, Bryan, I don't recall hearing about those dots before. Did scholars see those before, or did the new technology reveal them? I didn't quite remember that. Tell the audience about that.
Yeah, so on the part of the Moabite stone that is undamaged, you can clearly see dots, and these are how they divided the words, separated them. We use spaces, they use dots to separate them.
Right.
But because the inscription goes over a damaged part, it was kind of hard to see whether it did or didn't, and they have confirmed that yes, it does have a dot there at the beginning and at the end, and so clearly it's a single phrase, and House of David is the one that makes the most sense.
Yeah, it's fantastic stuff, Bryan. Okay, well, we're going to be breaking now into the final part of our list after this break. Friends, don't go away. ABR is excited to announce the publication of Volume 2 from our excavations at Khirbet el-Maqadir. The volume details archaeological remains from about 350 BC to the 8th century. This includes a New Testament village that may have been visited by Jesus. Over 400 pages of analysis, photos, and maps. You can pick up a copy today by visiting BibleArchaeology.org.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Hi friends, welcome back to Digging for Truth. We're breaking into the top 3 now discoveries of 2023, and Bryan Windle's here to be your guide. So Bryan, number 3, if you will, sir.
All right, we're into the top 3 now. Number 3 is a 3rd century Syriac translation of the Gospel of Matthew that was discovered. Now, this is really, really interesting. A scholar from the Austrian Academy of Sciences discovered a palimpsest. Now, that's a fragment where they've taken a piece of parchment, for example, and they've erased the previous text to reuse it. All right, that's what that is. And what they discovered was this 1750-year-old text of the Gospel of Matthew, but a Syrian translation of it. And so that was done in the 3rd century, and then sometime in the 6th century it was erased, and another text was put in there, and then a little bit later it was erased again, and a series of Gregorian hymns were written over top of it. But what the scholars have been able to do is use ultraviolet lighting to see the previous texts that were previously there but erased, because the stains are still there even though you can't see them with the naked eye. And what they discovered was part of a Syriac translation of the Gospel of Matthew. And this is really important because it's a very early copy, but secondly, this is only the 4th textual witness to the Syrian stream of translations of the Gospel of Matthew. And so this will be very helpful for scholars moving forward in looking at how Scripture was translated and disseminated in the early centuries of Christianity.
Very important, Brian. Something in the Western Church, we don't know much about the Syriac Church, but very early they started translating the Old Testament in the 2nd century. They had text, interpreters. They have a great tradition in Syria. It's something well worth studying for us as the church. And this discovery really highlights how seriously they took the text and how important it was. But okay, we got to move to number 2. We have another writing. This is not a palimpsest. How you like that, huh? But a papyrus. So let's talk about this next one.
Sure. Number 2 is the Sayings of Jesus papyrus. And this is part of the Oxyrhynchus papyri, which is a group of papyri that were discovered at Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s by Grenfell and Hunt, and they've slowly been translated and being published. And in the most recent edition that was published and promoted in September 2023, there was a fragment that's known by its technical designation of P Oxy 5575. And it contains a small portion of Matthew chapter 6, of Luke chapter 12, and of the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, number 27. Now, this isn't like a biblical text. What this is just a manuscript with some sayings of Jesus. Somebody apparently a long time ago wanted to collect some sayings of Jesus and got them from different sources. Now, this is really important manuscript, though, because it is the oldest manuscript with text from Matthew chapter 6 that we have. And it dates to the late 2nd or early 3rd century. So that's the time frame that this text was copied. And it is it's also the earliest witness to the Gospel of Thomas. Now, we should also note that the Gospel of Thomas is a Gnostic gospel. So it comes from later in the 2nd century. It was not published by eyewitnesses in the 1st century, like Matthew and Mark were, and Luke. This is Gnostic means secret knowledge. So this is people who are like, oh, I have a secret knowledge of what Thomas said. And so they make up stuff and they write that down, but it is not a canonical gospel like the others two are, but still a very important discovery that was published this year.
Yeah, for our audience, we should mention I had a couple episodes with Dr. Craig Evans where we talk about these Gnostic Gospels called Jesus and the Manuscripts. It's a 2-parter. Check that out if you get a chance, friends. All right, well, here we are now to the number 1 discovery of 2023. We should mention that for this one, you did a whole episode a couple years ago on this subject, where is biblical Bethsaida? And you've been keeping your eye on this because this is really important. Jesus was there. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so there are a couple of sites that vie to be considered the actual site of the lost city of Bethsaida. One is at Tel, but there've been problems with it for a while. It's farther away from the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and they really haven't found a lot from the 1st century there. However, El Araj is a site that's right on the edge of the Sea of Galilee, and they have been going now, I think, 7 years or so, and I've been watching this dig, and this year they continue to find evidence of 1st century occupation in a residential area that they were excavating. They found coins, they found stone vessels, they found fishing implements, pottery, fishing weights, and interestingly enough, an inkwell that was discovered in the home of what appears to be a fisherman, because there were fishing weights and other things like that in it. And this is interesting because some critics have said, fishermen like Peter and John would have been illiterate. They couldn't have written the Gospels that they wrote, and this would indicate that perhaps fishermen in the 1st century might well have been literate to have an inkwell there. Now, the advantage that the folks at El Araj have is that they do 2 digs a year. They do one in the summer, they do another one in the fall, and when they went back in the fall, they excavated in the Byzantine church there, and they excavated under the apse. They removed the mosaic floor there, and what they discovered were some walls. Now, when the Byzantines built their churches, under the apse, that round part at the front, that's where the site they would be honoring, and they found a wall dating to the 2nd or 3rd century, and another wall dating to the 1st century. Now, this is a structure they believe is the famous, they're calling it the Church of the Apostles, a Byzantine church that was described by a pilgrim, Willibald, in about 725 AD, who says he visited a church there that was built over the home of Peter and Andrew. And so this would be very interesting, wouldn't it? We've got 1st century walls under that apse now. More research needs to be done, but a really exciting discovery and my number 1 pick for 2023.
Well, that was fantastic, Bryan. Well, we have run out of time, my friends, so we need to say goodbye. I want to thank you for working hard on this list, for doing this every year to give our folks the best discoveries, for tracking and all that you do to serve the Lord, Bryan. We're so grateful for you.
Thanks so much for having me, Henry. It's an honor.
All right, friends. Well, we put a bow on 2023, and we want to thank you for watching Digging for Truth this past year. We also appreciate very much watching the show. We hope these discoveries have helped demonstrate to you the reliability of Scripture, its trustworthiness, and hopefully that you'll receive the message that's in it in the gospel of Jesus. We thank you for joining us.